He called my chemotherapy a convenient excuse and drained our accounts. By morning, I had frozen every dollar he ever touched. Let me ask you something before I tell you the rest, because you're the only one I've ever said this next part out loud to. If a man watched a needle go into the port under your collarbone 41 times, and then stood in a kitchen that still smelled of the burnt toast he'd made and forgotten, and told you that your cancer was a convenient excuse, what would you have done? That was the word he used, convenient. He said it while scraping the black square of toast into the sink, the disposal grinding on nothing, the fluorescent tube over the stove buzzing the way it had buzzed for 3 years because he never once changed it. He said, "The chemo's been a convenient excuse for you to check out of this relationship, Vera." And I stood there in my socks on the cold tile, holding my cracked yellow thermos of ginger tea, and I did not say a word. What Todd didn't understand, what he had no way of understanding, because he had never once asked me a real question about my job in 11 years, was that quiet is not the same as harmless. He thought he was talking to a sick woman in a bathrobe. He was talking to the person who counts the money for a living. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning and tell it to you in order, the way I'd tell it to a jury, because in a manner of speaking, that's exactly what I once had to do. My name is Vera Holloway. I'm 53 now, though when this happened, I was 51. I grew up in Pueblo, Colorado, 90-odd miles south of where all of this ended, in a 2-bedroom house on Evans Avenue, where my father fixed refrigeration units and my mother did the books for 3 different auto shops out of a spiral notebook at the kitchen table. She could add a column of 40 numbers in her head faster than the shop owners could run the adding machine, and she never once made a mistake. And none of those men ever paid her what they'd have paid a man. I watched her get cheated for 12 years and stay polite about it. I decided somewhere around age 9 that I would learn the numbers so well that no one could ever cheat me and get away with it. So I did. I put myself through Colorado State, worked the register at a King Soopers grocery for $4.25 an hour to do it, and I graduated in 1996 with a degree in accounting and a pile of loans I paid off in 3 years. I didn't want to be a regular accountant, the kind who reconciles your receipts in April. I wanted the other thing, the thing where you follow the money after somebody has tried to hide it. I became a forensic accountant. That's my whole career, and it's the part Todd never bothered to learn. I spend my days finding the dollar that somebody moved into a shell company at 2 a.m. and swore they never touched. I've testified in fraud cases in 7 states. I've helped freeze the assets of a man who stole millions from a church. Tracing hidden money is not a hobby of mine. It is the thing I am better at than almost anyone you will ever meet. By the time I met Todd Aldis in the spring of 2013, I owned a solid life. I had a house in Littleton. I was well on my way to owning Free and Clear. I had my retirement, my savings, my name on a corner office at a firm on 17th Street. I was 40, and I'd stopped expecting romance, which is usually right about when it walks in. He walked in at a fundraiser for the food bank, holding 2 glasses of bad Chardonnay, and he handed me one like we'd already agreed to it. Todd was a regional sales manager for a medical equipment distributor. Infusion pumps, hospital beds, the machines that go beep. He was funny in that easy way salesmen are funny, and he remembered the name of my mother the second time we met, and for a good long while he was genuinely kind. I want to be honest about that because the story is worse if he was always a monster. He wasn't. The first years were good. He learned to make my mother's green chili. He drove me to Pueblo when my father was dying in 2015, and he sat in that ICU for 9 hours and didn't complain once. I loved him. I'm not embarrassed to say it. When you tell these stories, you're supposed to sound like you saw it coming. I didn't. We never married. That was my hesitation more than his, if I'm honest. I'd watched my mother's whole life get folded into a man's ledger and disappear, and something in me held back one last inch. But after 6 years, we merged the practical things, the way couples do. We opened a joint household account at First Bank. We put both names on a money market savings we used for the big stuff, the roof, the trips, the emergency cushion. By 2020, that joint savings held right around $214,000. And most of it, I'll tell you plainly, was mine. My salary was $186,000 a year. Todd cleared less than half that in a good year, and there were a lot of bad ones he explained away with words like the territory and the reorg. I let the imbalance ride because I loved him and because I don't keep score with people I love. That was my mistake, not trusting him. Trusting him and turning off the part of my brain that counts. I turned off the one thing I was best at because I thought love meant you were allowed to stop looking. Remember that. It matters later. The wrong notes started small, the way they always do. The first one was the phone. Todd had always left his phone anywhere, on the counter, in the bathroom, face up and buzzing. Sometime in the fall of 2021, it started living face down. He'd flip it over when I walked into a room, a little motion of the wrist, casual, like brushing away a fly. I noticed it the way I notice a transposed digit in a spreadsheet, a thing that doesn't fit, that the eye snags on. I said nothing. I filed it away in the quiet place inside me where I keep things I'm not ready to look at yet. The second note was the mileage. Todd's territory was the Front Range, Denver, Boulder, Fort Collins, day trips, home by 6. But that winter he started driving to Grand Junction for a big hospital account, a 4-hour haul each way, twice a month. I know cars. I balance my own maintenance log. And I noticed that his Acura was putting on about 900 miles a month more than Grand Junction and back would account for. 900 miles a month is a place you're going that you're not telling me about. I didn't say that either. I wrote the odometer readings in the back of my planner in pencil. It's an old habit. When something doesn't reconcile, you don't confront it, you document it, and you wait for the pattern. The third note came from a woman named Monica. I want to be careful here because Monica turned out to be less the villain than the symptom. She was a purchasing coordinator at one of Todd's client hospitals, 34 years old, and I found her the way I find everyone, through the money. In January of 2022, I was doing our taxes, which I always did, at that same kitchen table where I'd watched my mother do other men's books. I pulled our joint credit card statement to sort the deductible charges, and there were 2 hotel nights at the Gaylord Rockies out by the airport, on nights Todd had told me he was in Grand Junction. Grand Junction is the opposite direction. You do not drive west to sleep east. I sat with that for a long time, the pencil in my hand, the house very quiet, and I understood something had a shape now, even if I couldn't see all of it. And here's the thing I have to make you understand, because it's the hinge the whole story turns on. That was the exact winter I got sick. In February of 2022, I found the lump, and by March, it had a name. Stage 2 breast cancer, the invasive kind, the kind they treat hard and fast. My oncologist put me on 8 rounds of chemotherapy at a private clinic on the outskirts of Denver, a place called Cottonwood Ridge Oncology, run by a company called Bright Line Health, out past the last strip mall where the plains open up and you can see the mountains lying along the west like a jaw. Every other Wednesday, I sat in a beige recliner for 4 hours while they ran the drugs into the port they'd sewn under my collarbone. I brought my cracked yellow thermos of ginger tea every single time because the ginger was the only thing that touched the nausea, and because my mother had given me that thermos in 1994, and I am a person who holds on to things. So picture it. I am 50 years old. I have lost my hair in clumps into the shower drain. I've dropped 19 pounds. I am scared in a way I have never been scared. And this is the season my partner of nearly a decade chose to start hiding hotel receipts and putting his phone face down. He came to exactly 2 of my 8 chemo sessions. 2. The first one he spent in the parking lot on a call. The second one, he sat beside me for 40 minutes and then said he had to move the car and never came back inside. A nurse named Deb, 56, gray braid, hands like a bricklayer's, sat with me instead, in the chair he'd left warm, and held the thermos steady when my hands shook too hard, and she said, so quietly the machines almost covered it, "Honey, where is your person?" I didn't have an answer. Deb started saving me the good recliner, the one by the window, and slipping me the ginger candies from her own purse, and every session after that, she found a reason to be near me. Remember, Deb, she's the one who saw. Meanwhile, the money started to move. I didn't know it in real time. That's the thing I'm ashamed of. That the one woman in Colorado who could have caught it early was too busy being poisoned back to health to check the accounts. But I want to walk you through what he did, because it's important you understand it wasn't a crime of passion. It was slow, and it was calculated, and it counted on me being too weak to look. Starting that spring, Todd began moving money out of our joint money market savings in careful, unremarkable amounts. Never a round sum, always just under the $10,000 threshold that triggers a federal reporting form. And let me tell you, a regular cheating boyfriend does not know that number. Someone told him that number, or he looked it up. And either way, it means he knew he was doing something he'd have to hide. He moved that money into a business checking account he'd opened at a different bank under an LLC I'd never heard of, Front Range Med Consulting, LLC, which had no clients, no invoices, and no purpose except to be a bucket he could pour our savings into and call it his. Over 14 months, he siphoned $148,500 out of a $214,000 account, and some of it, I'd find this later in the wire memos in black and white, went straight to Monica. $12,000 for the down payment on a Jeep. A few thousand more he labeled consulting fee that landed in her personal account the day after her birthday. I didn't see the ledger yet, but I felt the temperature drop. He stopped touching me. He stopped asking how I felt, which somehow was worse, because a man who won't ask how you feel has already decided your answer doesn't concern him. He started staying out later, and the phone stayed face down. And once, when I was too nauseous to stand and asked him to bring me the anti-sickness pills from the bathroom, he sighed, a long, put-upon sigh, like I'd asked him to drive to Pueblo. And I lay there in the dark and listened to him sigh, and something in me went very still and very clear, though it wasn't time yet. The boiling point came on a Tuesday in June of 2022, 2 days after my 7th chemo round, the rough one, the one that put me on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m. with the tile against my cheek. I'd asked Deb that afternoon, half joking, whether people ever just quit before the last round, and she'd taken my hand and said, "Not you. You finish things." I drove home, holding on to that. Todd was in the kitchen making toast. He'd left it too long, and it had gone black, and the smoke had set off the little alarm, and the whole house smelled of char, and the fan was roaring. He was scraping the burnt square into the sink, running the disposal on nothing, and the fluorescent tube over the stove was buzzing. That same broken buzz 3 years running that he'd never fixed because fixing things in my house was apparently my job, even while I was dying. I came in holding my thermos. I asked him, and I remember my voice was very small, whether he could take me to the last chemo round on Wednesday, the 8th one, the finish line. I said I was scared to drive myself afterward. And Todd Aldis turned around, toast crumbs on his hands, and he said, "You know what, Vera? I think the chemo's been a convenient excuse for you to check out of this relationship. You've checked out. You've made yourself the sick one, so you never have to look at what you're not doing for me." I want you to sit in that with me for a second. What I'm not doing for him. While the drugs designed to kill my cells dripped into my chest, his complaint was about what I wasn't doing for him. I didn't scream. I want you to know that, because I think people expect the screaming. I didn't cry either, not then. I've spent 30 years in rooms where the whole game is to keep your face still while your mind does the arithmetic. And that training does not leave you when you need it. I just looked at him, and I felt the last inch of that trust, the one I'd held back for good reason and then handed over anyway, click shut like a ledger closing. And in the quiet that followed, I heard my own mind say, in my mother's flat Pueblo voice, "All right, show me the money then." That was the click. Not rage, not heartbreak, though the heartbreak came later, in doses, for months. Just a cold, clean certainty. The same feeling I get when a set of books that looked fine suddenly reveals its lie, and the whole picture snaps into focus. I went to bed that night beside a man I no longer loved, and I did not sleep, and I did not plan revenge in the movie sense. I planned an audit. The next morning, Wednesday, my last chemo, I drove myself to Cottonwood Ridge with the thermos on the passenger seat, and I sat in Deb's window recliner for the 8th and final time, and while the drugs ran, I did something I should have done a year earlier. I opened the banking app on my phone. I looked at our joint money market savings, $65,500, down from $214,000. I have caught a great many people stealing a great deal of money in my life. I have never once felt it in my own body the way I felt that number. My ears rang. Deb saw my face and came over, and I turned the phone away because it was mine to carry, and I said I was fine, and she didn't believe me, but she let me have my dignity. Then I turned the phone back, and I did the thing I actually know how to do. I stopped feeling, and I started tracing. That afternoon, I called Ellen Park. Ellen is 61, a family law attorney I'd worked expert witness cases with for 15 years. I'd built the financial exhibits that won her 3 of the ugliest divorces in Denver County. She'd sat at my table for Thanksgiving twice. When she picked up and I said, "Ellen, I need you, and I need you to treat me like a client and not a friend, because I'm about to be a terrible client, the kind who knows too much." She was quiet for a second, and then she said, "Tell me what he took." Not, "Are you sure?" Not, "Maybe you're misreading it." She knew what I did for a living, which is exactly why she believed me in one sentence. That's what a real ally is. They don't make you prove your own competence before they'll stand next to you. Now here's the part where people expect me to describe some grand confrontation. There wasn't one. Not yet. What there was instead was 3 weeks of the quietest, most patient work I have ever done. And I have reconstructed embezzlement schemes that took a forensic team 6 months. This one I did alone, at night, at the kitchen table, still nauseous, my hair growing back in gray fuzz, and I did it clean, because I knew that whatever I built would have to survive being looked at by people whose job was to tear it apart. I did not touch a single account in a way he could see. That was rule 1. A thief who feels the trap will empty what's left and run. So I became invisible. I pulled 14 months of statements from every account, the joint checking, the money market, the credit cards, and then, because I had authority as a co-owner on the household finances, and because Todd was sloppy, I found my way to the paper trail of Front Range Med Consulting, LLC. He'd used our home printer for the LLC registration. The confirmation was still in the printer's memory. He'd filed it himself at the Colorado Secretary of State to save the lawyer fee, which meant it was a matter of public record, which meant I could pull the whole thing for free in about 4 minutes. I built a spreadsheet, 41 transfers. I matched each withdrawal from our savings to each deposit into his shell account, date by date, dollar by dollar, the way you match a fingerprint. I documented the 2 wires to Monica. I screenshotted the hotel charges, the Jeep down payment, the consulting fee. I saved everything 3 times, a drive in the house, a drive in my safe deposit box at the bank, and an encrypted copy I emailed to Ellen so there'd be a version outside my walls with a timestamp on it. Chain of custody. You never build a case you can't defend. And then I found the thing that changed it from a sad breakup into a crime. Because moving your own money into your own shell company is ugly, but it's arguably legal if the account is truly joint. What is not legal, what is flatly, provably fraud, is what he'd done in April when I was at my sickest. He had forged my signature on a form to withdraw $38,000 from a joint retirement rollover that required both account holders' authorization. He'd traced my signature off our mortgage refinance from 2019, and he'd done it lazily, the way a man does a thing when he's certain the only person who could catch him is too busy dying to look. The forged loops of the V in Vera didn't match my hand. I've been an expert witness on signature fraud. I could have identified that forgery in my sleep. That was the moment the whole thing turned over in my chest and became not grief, but work. He hadn't just betrayed me. He'd committed a felony against a woman with a port in her chest, and he'd assumed her illness was his cover. He thought the chemo was convenient for him. He was right about that. He was just wrong about who it was convenient for. I want to tell you I felt triumphant. I didn't, not that night. I sat at my mother's old table with all of it laid out, and I put my head down on the cool wood, and I cried for about 10 minutes. For the man who drove me to Pueblo and sat 9 hours in the ICU, because that man had existed, and I'd loved him, and I had to bury him before I could deal with the one who'd replaced him. Then I dried my face and I got back to work, because the dead don't need you and the living case does. Ellen and I set the sequence. This is the part I'm almost proud of, and I'll walk you through it slowly because the timing was everything, and because you asked me. Well, you didn't, but you're still listening, which is its own kind of asking. Todd's last day at his medical equipment company was a Friday. I knew because I'd seen the calendar invite for his own farewell lunch. He was jumping to a competitor, a move he hadn't told me about, which told me he was already planning his exit from me, too. His new job started Monday with a signing arrangement and a fresh salary he thought was going to be his clean start. He also, I learned, had a big personal transfer scheduled. He'd told the First Bank branch he wanted to move the remaining $65,500 out of our joint savings into his shell account first thing Thursday morning to close me out before he vanished. He had actually told a teller that, out loud, thinking a joint account was his to strip because he'd decided it was. So everything had to land Wednesday night. By morning, it all had to be done, or he'd move the last of the money and be gone, and a frozen, empty account catches nobody. Here is what I did on that Wednesday, 1 year almost to the day after my last chemo, though the reckoning itself moved fast once it moved. I filed a report of financial fraud with 2 banks, backed by my spreadsheet and the forged signature exhibit, and, this is the part people don't realize a co-owner can do, I invoked the fraud holds. When you report a forged withdrawal on a jointly held account, the bank doesn't ask the other party's permission. It freezes. Front Range Med Consulting's checking account, the bucket, with about $151,000 sitting in it, our savings plus his own deposits all commingled, which is the mistake that let me reach all of it, froze Wednesday at 9 p.m. when the fraud department flagged it. The joint money market, his $65,500 escape fund, froze at the same time. He could no longer move it Thursday morning because there was no Thursday morning for him to move it in. And Ellen, working her side, had already filed for an emergency financial restraining order, the kind you get when you can show a court a documented, ongoing dissipation of marital-type assets. And my spreadsheet was so clean, the judge signed it that same afternoon. Every account Todd Aldis had touched with our money in it was, by the time the sun came up Thursday, locked. He found out at the private clinic. I didn't plan that part. I want to be clear. I'm not a monster. I didn't stage it there for cruelty. It's simply where the last thread pulled tight. Brightline Health, the company that owned Cottonwood Ridge where I'd done my chemo, was also, in one of the small, ugly coincidences of a small state connected to a client account Todd was servicing for his new employer. A distribution contract at that very clinic was his first big Monday deal. He'd driven out to Cottonwood Ridge that Thursday morning to shake hands and close it, in the same beige building where his partner had been poisoned back to life while he sat in the parking lot. And that's where his cards started declining. That's where his phone lit up with the bank. That's where a man from First Bank's fraud line told him his accounts were frozen pending a forgery investigation, and where, because Ellen is thorough and I am thorough, a process server was waiting in the lobby with the restraining order, holding it against the exact reception desk where Deb worked the front on Thursdays. Deb called me. She didn't have to. She said, "Vera, your fella is standing in my lobby the color of a bedsheet, and I think you should know he's here." I said, "Thank you, Deb." She said, "You finished it." I said, "I did." She said the ginger candies were on the house, whatever that meant, and we both laughed, the tired kind. I didn't go down there. I want you to understand that, too. I never once needed to see his face. I've learned that the revenge that actually heals you is not the one you watch. It's the one where you go on with your Wednesday. But he called me, of course, 6 times. On the 7th, I answered, because I wanted to hear it, and his voice was doing a thing I'd never heard it do in 11 years. It was shaking. The salesman's easy voice was gone. He said the banks had made a mistake. He said I had to call them and fix it because I knew people. He said, and I swear to you this is the exact word, that this was all a big misunderstanding and could I please be reasonable because he had a new job starting Monday and no access to any money. And I said the only thing I said to him in that entire final act. I said, "Todd, it froze by morning. Everything you touched. Because it turns out I wasn't checking out of anything. I was the forensic accountant taking notes." And I hung up and I set the phone face down on the counter. Face down, the way he used to. And I made myself a cup of tea in the cracked yellow thermos. And I sat in the quiet. And for the first time in 18 months, my hands didn't shake. The rest was paperwork, and paperwork is my native language. There was no marriage to dissolve, which made it cleaner, not messier. We untangled the joint assets under the court's supervision, and because I could document every dollar's origin, I got back what was mine, which was nearly all of it. The forged signature felony was referred to the district attorney. Todd pled to avoid trial and took 2 years of probation, a felony record, and a restitution order of $148,500 that he'll be paying back at a few $100s a month for the rest of his working life, from whatever's left after the child support case Monica filed 8 months later, when it turned out convenient men are convenient to more women than one. I didn't celebrate that. I just noted it, the way I note everything. I kept the house. I kept my retirement, rebuilt past where it had been before he raided it, because a restitution order plus my own steady deposits will do that in a year. I kept my name, which I'd never given up, thank God. And Monica? I never spoke to her, but Ellen did, once, in a deposition. And Ellen told me afterward that Monica had asked, almost bewildered, didn't she know how easy it was? She never even looked. And Ellen said she'd smiled and answered, "She looks for a living. She was just waiting for the right amount." I've been cancer-free for 4 years now. My hair came back curly, which it never was, and gray, which I've decided to keep because I earned every strand. I turned 53 in April. I still keep the thermos. It sits on the windowsill over my sink where the morning light comes in, and I use it every single day. And the crack on the side has never gotten any bigger, which my mother would have said is because you take care of the things that took care of you. Last month, I did the thing I'd been building toward without quite admitting it. I set up a fund, $50,000 to start, more each year, through Cottonwood Ridge for patients going through treatment alone. It pays for a ride to every session and a person to sit in the chair beside you and hold your cup steady when your hands shake. so that no woman in a beige recliner ever has to ask a nurse where her person is. I named it after my mother, who counted other men's money at a kitchen table for 12 years and never got thanked. Deb runs the volunteer side. She retired from nursing, but she comes in Thursdays anyway, and she keeps a bowl of ginger candies at the front desk, and she tells the new patients the fund was started by a lady who finished things. Ellen and Deb came over this past Sunday. I made my mother's green chili. I finally learned it right, better than Todd ever made it, and I said so, and we laughed. Ellen brought a bottle of something good, and she raised her glass, and she looked at me across the table where I'd once caught a thief, and she said, "To convenient excuses." And the three of us drank to it, and it didn't sting anymore. That word was mine now. He'd meant it as the thing you hide behind. I'd turned it into the thing I built a whole clean life on top of. This morning I got up before the others were awake. I stood at the sink in my socks on the same cold tile, I never did replace it, and I filled the yellow thermos with ginger tea, more out of habit now than need, and I changed the fluorescent tube over the stove, finally, the one that buzzed for 3 years, because it's my kitchen and my ladder and my 2 working hands. It flickered once and came on clean and steady and white. Then I turned it off, because the sun was up, and I didn't need it, and I took my tea out to the back step to watch the light come across the plains toward the mountains. And I sat there, and I drank it, and I didn't think about him at all.